Hello guys, it's me, Greed here. Today I would like to talk about Blizzard's balanced philosophy of changing cooldowns instead of addressing a cooldown's actual strength. So, to start, look at a hero like Baptiste. Now he's obviously got one of the longest, if not I think the longest cooldown in the game, on Immortality Field, and rightfully so, some might say, where Immortality Field is a ludicrously overpowered and very quite silly ability in Overwatch, where instead of addressing the actual power of the Immortality Field, they've instead opted to just continuously make the cooldown longer instead to 25 seconds. It's a 25-second long cooldown. Now, that makes it quite boring, because it does two things. Firstly, it means that the Baptiste isn't having that much fun anymore, because his cooldown is longer, therefore he gets to press his buttons less often, which means he's doing less, which is less fun. But it's also the case that because it's a longer cooldown, it means that it has to be used at the perfect moment more often. That means that he's going to be holding on to it a lot longer, which artificially increases the cooldown of it because it lowers the amount of scenarios where it would be applicable to use it, thus making it an even longer cooldown artificially because of its strength, right? So, you're not just going to throw your Immortality Field at your Reinhardt when he's got a full shield that's up and he's taking 30 damage. You would never do that. You would actually wait until he was like 1 HP and he's swinging into their team and he's going to die. Then you give him the ammo. And this is where the frustration begins. Because on the enemy team, when something gets ammoed, you feel cheated. You feel robbed. You saw someone making a mistake. And you said, I'm going to capitalize on the mistake this guy's making. And then you actively make a play based off that mistake, where you outplay him and realistically should kill him, but you lose the duel or the matchup or whatever it may be because Immortality Field is used. A cooldown that you could not have predicted the use case of due to the level of unpredictability of it because it needs to be used at the perfect moment. This obviously adds a lot of frustration to the game, especially playing against it, but it can also be frustrating having it on your team, because you might make a play based off the existence of having the Immortality Field, and the Baptiste player might just think that your play isn't worth the ammo, so you end up risking a lot and having to fight to get out when you thought you could have just gone aggressive with the Immortality Field. Now, obviously you shouldn't do that, but in the lower ranks where people don't know, they might, and they might be playing off that cooldown. And the Baptiste going, well, there could be a scenario where someone's in more danger than this, so I'm just gonna wait, right? It's frustrating for both sides, but it's especially frustrating to play against. Now, this is obviously attached to 6v6 more than it's attached to 5v5, because in 6v6, the way they balanced a lot of characters is they just made the cooldowns longer, which is not good balance and extremely lazy. But it makes 6v6 especially bad in some cases, because Queen's shout cooldown is like 15 or 16 seconds. That's insanely long for how weak the actual shout cooldown is. It shouldn't be a 15-second long cooldown in 6v6. But this does a lot more than just have things that are frustrating to play into, like Suzu or Immortality Field, where instead of just saying, hey, yeah, this cooldown's too strong, let's nerf it, they add extra seconds to the cooldown. Now, this kind of fundamentally breaks some of the gameplay loop, and especially it's one of the biggest reasons for why poke slop has become more apparent, and it's especially apparent on maps like Watchpoint Gibraltar, where, for example, in Overwatch 1, this was the dive map. This was the map everyone that liked dive was excited for, because the whole map was about committing dive to things. It was more interesting. However, in Overwatch 2, you'll notice there's likely been a pretty big shift with the way people play Gibraltar, especially First Point Gibraltar, where what really happens is it's a case where the attacking team tries to push the cart through the tunnel as quickly as possible. They jump in the car and push it all the way while trying to mitigate all the poke they're going to get, while the defensive team spams and pokes the team on the cart to build ult as quickly as possible so that when the cart gets to that first corner, they're able to ult dump them and win the fight. It's become to the point where it's not worth going up and diving the high ground, and it's also not worth jumping off the high ground and committing to stopping the cart. So the reason for that is, if you're on the attacking team, you're going to have to be jumping into a positional disadvantage where the enemy team is on the high ground and they're in, obviously, their defensive positions where they're ready to take a fight up there. Then you have to take into account that all of the cooldowns on their team are typically going to be stronger, more mitigate-focused cooldowns that are very good at preventing dive, that are very good at sustaining people through dive, that are very defensive in nature in a lot of cases, and especially cooldowns that are very long. Now, this affects both teams. If you have a naturally defensive position where you're able to do an easier job with poking, because you can just stand there and shoot, it's obviously going to take more skill and more coordination to commit a dive on top of that composition, right? On top of the high ground. Therefore, because it's more difficult, you're going to be at a natural disadvantage to commit dive to that, regardless of the scenario. But especially because they've got a defensive advantage because of the positioning that they've been given by the map, right? Then you have to take into account your extremely long cooldowns. When you commit to a situation like that, if you end up burning your cooldowns trying to get into a situation where you're actually able to gain an advantage, it may be the case that you have to wait an excruciatingly long time of not being able to do anything at all because you don't have your cooldown up. Meaning that if you don't use your cooldown, your long cooldown, at the perfect moment, and they do, they're naturally going to win because of the cooldown strength being so high, but with the cooldown being high, instead of a scenario where the cooldowns are lower, they happen more often, but they're substantially weaker, meaning there are more opportunities to play around things. However, with the longer cooldowns that are more powerful, it means that if one team uses that cooldown slightly better than another team, it would be the equivalent of one team using a mirroring ult slightly better. It's a giant advantage, which means if you're on the attacking team on Gibraltar, it really, in a lot of cases, isn't even worth committing to the high ground for when you could just push the cart instead, because you don't want to risk burning your longer cooldowns that are extremely powerful, meaning that you just get a bunch of free cart push because the enemy team is thinking the same way on the defense. They don't want to jump onto the low ground and give up their positional advantage, and they also don't want to jump into a big group of heroes that are based in the reality that they like to play anti-dive, that have extremely long sustaining cooldowns, that have a ton of mitigation and so on. It means that jumping into that is not worth the risk. So you have two teams where they've both analyzed that, hey, it's actually not worth it for either of us to go and fight each other because we're playing into our extremely long sustaining based mitigation based cooldowns that actually prevent you from interacting with each other, which makes both teams just stand there and poke each other. And this has become really prevalent on every map, but especially Gibraltar. And my point is that this is making the game insanely boring in 5v5 and 6v6. This one is not a format issue. Now, obviously, the format does come into play in some scenarios where the cooldowns are longer in 6v6 when they shouldn't be. But this longer cooldown issue is not a direct byproduct of one of the formats, thankfully. It is just simply bad balance and bad design where you are incentivizing both teams to interact with each other as little as possible, because then you risk burning your extremely powerful and long cooldown. I don't know why they're doing this. An example would be like Genji. Genji's had his deflect on 8 seconds for like 10 years. Why would they change it instead of just doing other stuff to it? Listen, I don't think Genji should have had the deflect nerf, but I can understand that if you were going to nerf it, then you would obviously go about doing it in a certain way, and it wouldn't be the way they did it, because making the cooldown longer makes the hero more passive, which means he relies on tank follow-up more, which exacerbates the issue. Genji is considered a powerful character in 5v5, and especially a very annoying character in 5v5, primarily because of his ability to follow up on the extremely powerful nature of a 5v5 super tank, meaning that he doesn't need to worry about the space he's occupying because there's one less tank to stop him from doing it. Therefore, he can get any space he wants, and he gets all the follow-up on his super tank, meaning that he has an extremely easy job where he gets all the space he wants and all the follow-up he wants, where he cannot be punished. And instead of just saying, hey, Maybe the deflect cooldown is a little bit broken, which it wasn't, but if you were going to nerf it, the best way to do it would be by just lowering the duration that it's up for. Make it 1.25 seconds, make it 1.5 seconds, make it so you can't manually cancel it. Do something like that instead of making the cooldown longer, which makes the issue worse. Because the longer cooldown makes it so he's poking more, playing more passively, waiting for the perfect opportunity more often, which means he's dueling less, putting himself in less risk, and relying on follow-up more, which makes the game more boring. They do not understand that when they make the cooldown longer, it means that he has to wait for an opportunity longer, which means he incurs less risk and gets to do his annoying playstyle of playing map control Genji and follow up on the tank Genji more often, because it quickly becomes the only reliable way to get any consistent impact on the game. Meaning that if you actually wanted to fix Genji, then you should have not touched the cooldowns at all and started focusing on the real problem, which is the format and the tank. That's why, for example, in 6v6, Genji goes back to being a shit-can hero, where he's absolutely terrible. But in 5v5, he's a broken, brain-dead retard character, where all you do is go, hey, my hazard's jumping in, dash melee, I win. That's boring. It doesn't actually play the game like Genji was designed to be played for. Genji was designed to be a dueling hero, a 1v1 hero, a hero that you were going off and making solo play with, a hero that was built around the idea of full committing to an opportunity and either winning or losing through your skill. There was no getting away, there was no getting out, it was commitment. And that's not the case for Genji anymore, because if you do commit as Genji and it's not the perfect moment, you've got all the more reason to just simply die because your cooldowns are longer and weaker because of this terrible balance decisions that they made, primarily because they don't want to change 5v5 or the super tanks. And that's why the cooldowns are a lot longer, and that's why the game is more focused, and that's why the game is shit. But no one will ever admit to that, because all the people that are arguing for 5v5 are the same people complaining about these issues that I talk about. We're like, oh, these are problems, let's address these problems, but they don't understand where they come from, they don't understand the root of the issue, meaning that they end up attacking the wrong thing and making it worse, and meaning that all of the things they're complaining about just become more prevalent because they don't understand. Anyway, I love you all. I hope you have a good day. Have a good day. I hope you completed your drives if you care about them. I love you all. Mwah. Have a good one. I hope you're all safe and sound, and I appreciate you all. Thank you. I love you. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye.